Yeah, so basically, like Joe was saying, we're going to delve right now into this Trump system and what made Ridgewood, what made it different.
Well, my first year in high school was at Maine West. Maine West is a traditional high school. So I had classes 5 or 6 periods. You had bells, you moved between the classes at the bells. You had a lunch period, and that's how the high schools were organized. We had textbooks. It would look, Maine West looked like a modern version. It was the first year of operation for Maine West. And Maine West, although it had a very futuristic design, at least for 1959-60, it was a very traditional school that you would have been familiar with in terms of the programming in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Nothing particularly stood out. Ridgewood was, because of the Trump system, entirely different. So we had large group instruction. So typically in a class such as social studies, you'd have one lecture a week with a large group of kids, which caused problems for some teachers just in terms of managing that large number of students, particularly us. So we invented something called the heartbeat in the auditorium, where one of us would start going like this on the side of the chair, and then everybody would start, and nobody could get caught because everybody was doing it, and it sounded like the left ventricle of a huge heart. So 2 seminars, which were small group, a large group, and you had that, which meant that you had a lot of time that wasn't necessarily devoted to classroom instruction, which was to be apportioned in resource centers. But the problem that Ridgewood had in its first couple of years was there weren't any resources in the resource room. So you could go to the math resource room or the social science resource room or the language resource room, but they were all the same because there weren't any resources in any of them. And so we had a very sort of create with the staff experience, which was in some ways just terrific. Although we kind of looked around sometimes and said, what a dump. I mean, we don't have any resources here. And, we had one fella who was, they hired aides to staff these resource rooms at the time. And this fellow used to hide a flask of whiskey in his desk. And there was another guy, I swear, we used to joke that he'd give you a pass to the girls' bathroom if you asked him, So you could get a pass to go anywhere. He just didn't want to bother you. It was very quirky, very, very much something under creation. Now, the Trump system is what created this matrix of activities. And at its most essential element, it's a way of better utilizing faculty time. And by that I mean faculty here at the time, and also when I taught here, couldn't use textbooks. We were expected to collaborate to develop our own curricula and to tailor that curriculum to the class and the students we were actually teaching. So in order to free up time to collaborate and actually do curriculum development, you got that time by breaking out of this. You're going to teach as a teacher, you're going to teach 5 classes. The classes are going to be 45 minutes each, and you're going to march through your day like that. And maybe you'll have a study hall and you'll have a lunch period. Well, obviously, in that kind of an environment, where do you find the time to collaborate with your colleagues? Where do you find the time to research and write your own curriculum? So Ridgewood teachers, from the very beginning, were having to invent how to do that, because teacher education programs didn't know how to teach teachers how to do that. So Ridgewood, in that way, again, was a very lively experiment on how to make the Trump system work. What does it mean, actually? How do teachers behave? How do they behave differently? How do students relate to these various different kinds of patterns, different from anything that their parents or that they, in our case, had been familiar with? And in any kind of situation like that, you have things that slip through the cracks, create a lot of openings, and are in some respects, delightful in retrospect, because they make everything open for you. And that was the case also still when I was a teacher here. I really enjoyed teaching at Ridgewood, So for example, the year I sponsored the yearbook, the curriculum for my social studies class, I taught seniors. The curriculum for my social studies class was organized around themes. So poverty, intolerance, the environment, and war. That's what we studied. Each of those topics was one quarter's work. And I wrote that curriculum. I found the reading materials, I researched it, I figured out how to present it, and so on. So that's the Trump system in practice. There were a lot of people in and out of Ridgewood because it was a well-known national experiment. I mean, Ladies' Home Journal named Ridgewood one of the 10 best high schools in the country in 1968. And it did that because it was, at that time, very well known, seemed to be at the cutting edge, and there were a lot of people coming here to learn how to do what Ridgewood was doing. We got very used to seeing strangers in the hallways.
Do you consider it a success?
Well, I don't know if the Ridgewood I went to and that I taught at still exists. I'd have to look at your schedule. So do I consider it a success? Yeah. And in fact, I think it was a terrific success. And it was a terrific success in a lot of ways. I mean, if you look at the accomplishments of the people in your Alumni Hall of Fame, it's remarkable, isn't it? That a community this size could produce that kind of achievement. And what it speaks to is the connectedness that the students and the adults in this community felt, and the extent to which this high school is really an embodiment of the possibilities for this community. Terribly important. So did the Trump system succeed? I would say yes. And to the extent that Ridgewood has moved away from that, I'm sorry, because I don't really know how you free up faculty to do the kinds of work with students and with each other that we were able to do and that I was able to engage with faculty. So for example, when I was a student, I gave you an example of when I was a teacher. When I was a student, I had a social studies teacher who was very interested in Mortimer Adler's great books approach to teaching history. Mortimer Adler was at the University of Chicago at the time. And so my junior year, with him, our class learned the great books and so on. It was a terribly exciting adventure, Ridgewood was. I wouldn't have copped to it at the time, of course, because we all hated the place. Okay. So the question is, how did the system at Ridgewood, the Trump system, as a student affect my life, and as a teacher affect my life? I would say as a student, it was very important, and it's hard to separate because Ridgewood was a brand new school, so I don't know what would a traditional school. Maine West was a brand new school too. It was very different than Ridgewood. I would say what Ridgewood gave me was an opportunity to be as quirky, as rebellious, and as outspoken as I was, and still carry me forward and work with me and support me. I don't know how it would have been in a more traditional school. I mean, Ridgewood, I don't mean to make too much of it. I mean, one of my friends from just down the block on my street got kicked out of Ridgewood as a sophomore because he wouldn't cut his hair. Kids were kicked out of school because they wouldn't cut their hair. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. So it wasn't an ideal world. It's probably a great deal more physical than Ridgewood is today in terms of staff-student interaction and student-student interaction. But I don't know. I don't know what it is now. But I think the Trump system definitely opened up spaces for somebody like me to succeed, where in a traditional high school, I probably wouldn't have had the opportunities that I had. I probably would have bumped up against some rigid barriers with regard to academics or discipline, which I would have rejected coming from where I came from. So I'd say Ridgewood and the Trump system was the perfect school for me at the perfect time as a student and as a teacher as well. I came out of college very idealistic, very interested in making the world a better place and seeing ways in which I could contribute to that. I had students that cut my class to go down to work at a feeding center after the riots in 67 or 68, I can't remember which, because I think we had riots both of those years, in downtown Chicago. And these are working class kids from Norwich, as that turns out, who just came up to me and said, I just want you to know, Mr. Molnar, we're sorry we missed your class. We cut school because we were down at the West Side working handing out food. That made a big difference to me. I'm not sure that in a traditional high school I would have been given that kind of freedom as a teacher to explore with my students all kinds of things. It was intense because this country was falling apart, as it typically does from time to time. And I was the first teacher that grew a beard. And there were members of the board that wanted to fire me because I grew a beard. I didn't actually, in that case, grow a beard to rebel. It was just, I thought it'd be kind of nice to have a beard. And I grew it as soon as I had enough hair to grow it, which was my last year teaching here. And that was an enormously controversial thing, as it turns out. I didn't cut it. It's very interesting. And so Ridgewood is this dynamic, rough around the edges, conflictful, happy place. I feel very grateful to have been here as a student, and I've had the privilege to teach here as a faculty member.
So each community, regardless of the situation, develops its own characteristics, its own culture. Would you see any ways that students or the community members of Norwich Harvard Heights differ from those even just a couple of blocks away in a different community? And if you do, how much of that would you attribute to a radically different school system?
Well, boy, that's an interesting question, because when I was growing up, Harvard Heights and Norwich were themselves very different. And so we, meaning those of us who went to Union Ridge, were very aware of, as I said, being on the wrong side of the tracks, and we're very proud of that. We were very tight. My neighborhood had a 50-year reunion at Ridgemore Country Club, my neighborhood. Now, I'd never heard of a neighborhood reunion, and there were hundreds of people there that I grew up with. They came, I came there from Phoenix, Arizona in February to go to that neighborhood reunion, and it was terrific. It was terrific. We ate, drank, and danced, and laughed, and told stories. So we felt ourselves apart from the kids that came from Norwich. Ridgewood was a place that sort of bridged that gap and blended it to some degree. And what occurred to me as I was talking today when I got my award is, you realize that Norwich and Harvard Heights really need each other. In some ways, it's kind of a metaphor for life. Norwich and Harvard Heights, though they were, at least when I was a kid, were in some respects quite different. Not as different as we tried to play up, but quite different. But the fact is, without their shared border, they would be annexed by the city of Chicago. There would be no Norwich. There would be no Harvard Heights, absent the other. Norwich literally needs Harvard Heights, and vice versa, to keep them out of Chicago. And so this school played a real important role in bringing the community together. And I don't know, with regard to other schools elsewhere. I had friends whose primary interest was making sure that Ridgewood developed a reputation as being one of the toughest schools in Chicago. That was their primary interest, The system, the Trump system that we used, I have no doubt that separated us from kids that went to other schools. I just have absolutely no doubt, because as a student, it was a really different experience. Every day in school, a different lived experience.